Great defense, great run game, great offensive line. Sam Darnold playing like an MVP candidate. I mean, do the Vikings make the Super Bowl? Let's look at the rest of the NFC. Who are their what's their biggest competition? I think two of their biggest competition is in their division. You got the Packers and you got the Lions. And you played a pretty good game versus the Packers. The second half definitely worried me, especially defensive-wise. I mean, Jordan Love isn't 100%, but Jordan Love and the Packers and, Matt LaFleur, elite head coach, great head coach. He's really good at coming up with game plans. He's put his players in best positions possible. The first half was looking horrible for the Packers and really good for the Vikings. The second half was just flipped, but the Vikings were fortunate to come out with that one, and they were able to put it away. But that game was much closer than it should have been. Sam Darnold throwing 3 touchdowns in the first half. Aaron Jones and the offensive line is great. The run game is there. The weapons are there. The defense is really good. Brian Flores is a defense playing top notch. I mean, the Vikings making the Super Bowl, they continue to play like this all year long. It's very possible, but their biggest competition probably is within their own division. And the Packers, the Lions, then you have, outside of your division, you're probably looking at the Niners as the next team, as another team. Other than that, I don't really see too much competition in the NFC. I think there's about 3 or 4 teams that you could really say are, wow, they're the best teams in the NFC. But I don't, other than that, I think the rest of the NFC is kind of lacking. I mean, the Commanders, we'll see about the Commanders. The Commanders have been hot. They've been looking really good, but you're going to have to continue this all year long. And it's completely different playing red hot football, elite football, very high level football, in the beginning of the season in September and early October. But once you start getting to late October, November, December, that's when football really matters. So let's see if they can do it all year long. Let's see if their team, let's see if they can evolve. Now let's see, the Packers may have put something out there on film for other teams to look at and say, hey, we got to attack this. Now remember, I always say, it's kind of a little thing I throw in there is that just because a team needs to do a certain thing to win the football game or have a chance doesn't mean they can. But you do look at some of the other teams in the NFC, like the Lions, the Packers, for example. We just saw them play them, the Niners. I don't really think there's another team in there that you could say are heavyweights in that conference. I think these 4 teams are heavyweights. But those teams can, and they will do those things that need to be done to beat you. Those teams are very dominant on both sides of the football. Although the Packers were sus on offenses last week and in defense the first half. Everything looked back the first half for the Packers. The second half was a complete opposite. Lions have looked good, but their defense struggled. We're allowing a lot of, quite a few explosive plays versus the Seahawks. And, Seahawks, I don't take Geno Smith as a great quarterback. I think he's a good quarterback. I don't think he's great. But Geno Smith and that Seahawks offense were so explosive versus the Lions defense. So I'm interested to see how the Lions defense is going to, bounce back after a performance like that. Even though they won, they scored a lot of points, put a lot of points on the board, and Seahawks were really beat up in that game. They ran the football well. The Lions were explosive themselves on offense. But let's not forget how beat up the Seahawks were on defense. They were out like the top 5 out of their 7, front 7 guys. That's huge. That's big. And the Seahawks have a really good defense. We'll be talking about their defense and the Seahawks in a couple minutes here. But the Vikings making the Super Bowl, with how they're looking right now, not going to take it away from them. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say, hey, this team has earned that right now to be put in that conversation. Sam Darnold playing elite football, great football, clutch football. This team has just been great. Now, we do have to see how this team is going to respond when the games are closer, too. I mean, it was a closer game against the Packers towards the end. But, and versus the Niners as well. But they're not used to trailing, and they're not used to having to catch up. So if the Vikings start slow, I want to see how Sam Darnold responds then. I want to see how this team responds when they're down 14 points in going into the second half. So they just had a bad first half. Can they rally, and can they, rally from that deficit? I'm interested to see that, because that's always something that's very interesting that goes on throughout the season. when, you see a really dominant football team, 3/4 of the way through the season, and then you see them start getting into some close games, or even some close games throughout the season with some really good football teams when they're down 14 points. They're not as good as a football team because they're not used to being down. They're not used to being in that situation. So we'll see, will the Vikings even be in that situation? The way they're playing right now, it doesn't look like it. They play like they did in the second half versus the Packers. That's what it will be. But, I got to see that as well. I want to see how the Vikings and Sam Darnold perform when they're down, when they're behind by a couple of scores, or they're behind by 10 or 7. Or, I want to see how they respond to that. That is a very important aspect to any championship level sports team, football team. With the Vikings making the Super Bowl, I'm gonna go warm. I'm gonna say it's a little unlikely because the competition you do have is really up there. And what I saw in the second half of that Packers game looks like there might be something on film now that other teams can watch and look at and be like, hey, let's try to do this and let's see what we can do. Let's see if we can challenge the Vikings here and we can beat them this way. Like I said, it's a completely different story, and knowing what you need to do and being able to need to do it. But the Vikings making the Super Bowl, I'm going to warm say it's a little unlikely, but it's possible. The chance is very small, but it's there. They keep playing the way they are now. They're going to. There's no thing as chance. They're going to.